John, the 10th chapter, and I'm going to be started reading in verse 11. I am the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice. They will become one flock with one shepherd. I am the good shepherd. The shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Christ, totally dedicated, accepts ownership, responsibility, protects the flock with his life, talk the talk, walk the walk. Hired hand is not committed, not dedicated, does not protect the flock, flees from danger, only filling a position. I know my own know me. The good shepherd has personal knowledge of each member of the flock, even as the Father knows me and I know the Father. The good shepherd also has intimate knowledge with God the Father. I have other sheep, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. Remember in Acts, the 26th chapter, verse 23, as Paul is talking to Herod Agrippa II, who's in Caesarea while he's being incarcerated, made this comment to Herod Agrippa. He being Christ, would be the first to proclaim light both to Jewish people and Gentiles. I'm thankful as a Gentile to be included as part of the flock. I want to welcome everyone this morning. Elijah, our regular pulpit minister, is downstairs, as is accustomed to presenting a lesson to our Hispanic brothers and sisters on the fourth Sunday of every month. We do have a number of visitors with us this morning. I invite you to please stick around for a little while, conclusion of our service, so we can get to meet you. If I remember right, it was 1994. I'd been working in Beaver County, Utah, which is down in the south central part of the state, and I was headed back to Salt Lake City to catch a flight back east. But I decided I wouldn't take I-15. I would take some of the state roads. I had a little time. I wanted to be able to see part of the countryside. So I'd driven for a while, pretty much due north, and I'd passed through a place called Delta, Utah, pretty much in the central part of the state. And I remember driving up a tall hill, a very, very tall hill, and when I crested that hill, I looked over to my right, and I saw a sight that almost took my breath away. There was an immense flock of sheep, not a fence to be seen, free roaming there. It looked like a sea of white there. And I looked over to one side, and I saw the classic Basque a shepherd's wagon, at a campsite there. The ones that had the rounded edges on it. And running around the perimeter, patrolling this flock, were a couple of sheepdogs, and they were nipping at the heels of some of the wayward sheep. And there he was, sitting on his horse, a little bit higher up in elevation, looking down, in perfect control, calm, was the shepherd. In February and March, Elijah has been leading us through a series of lessons on the I am phrases applied to Christ in the New Testament. There's 7 of these. Previously, Elijah has brought us a lesson on I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, and I am the door, where Christ self-identifies himself from different perspectives. See, Christ was very effective in putting himself in different roles that could be readily appreciated by his audience. Today, as you've already pretty much surmised, we're going to be talking about I am the good shepherd in John the 10th chapter, verses 11 through 16. Unless you've been to the state fair and seen a sheep in person, you've maybe not ever encountered that species. Believe it or not, there's over 30,000 sheep in the state of North Carolina. You say, well, that's a lot of sheep. I should have seen one. Well, it pales in comparison to the 8.3 million hogs that we have in the state. Back in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up, sheep production was still somewhat prevalent in the Mid-South. I remember my grandfather, Safley, up in Bone Cave, Tennessee, at one time had a few sheep. And there were woolen mills that were scattered around the countryside. There was even a woolen mill there in the town where Charles and I grew up, Springfield, Tennessee. If you wanted to know exactly what color woolen blanket was being produced that week, the only thing you had to do was go down to the Sulphur Fork Creek that ran around behind the woolen mill there and look at the water, because it'd be green or yellow or blue. But sheep production, primarily in the United States, is confined to the Great Basin, the western parts of the country, Nevada and the states that come around and surround it. In World War II, we were especially dependent upon wool. See, back then we didn't have the synthetic fibers. We only had wool and cotton primarily, and we needed a lot of wool for the uniforms for the troops in Europe. But there was a problem. All of the young men that had served as shepherds out west had been taken in the army, so we ran into a problem. So Senator Patrick McCarran of Nevada and several other senators came in and they passed legislation that allowed the immigration of migrants with special skills. And of all places, they went to Spain. I say of all places, Spain. Spain, even though a neutral country in World War II, was heavily influenced by the Germans. But in a couple of months' time, when they set out the recruiting, they actually brought in over 1,200 Spanish Basque shepherds to come in and take care of the flocks out west. In biblical times, sheep and goat production were extremely prevalent. They were a measure of a man's wealth and status. And starting in Genesis, the 4th chapter, we read that Abel was a keeper of the flocks. And throughout the Bible, we can find hundreds of references to sheep production. See, sheep provide meat, hides, and wool. And the Jews would be extremely knowledgeable of all of the passages in the Old Testament, which they had, with regard to passages regarding to sheep and shepherding there. Because they would hear it from the scribes and the rabbis. You know, they came in and presented the lessons on the Sabbath, you know, in the synagogue, because they'd be reading from the scrolls. Who can forget the passage of 1 Samuel where David relates coming in and protecting the flock from the wild beasts as he was talking to Saul? What about the iconic passage that we read in Psalm the 23rd chapter? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And Isaiah 40, verse 11, where he simply makes the statement, like a shepherd, he will tend his flock. And then Ezekiel 34:12, as a shepherd cares for his herd. See, Christ, the Good Shepherd, perfectly understood while he could relate to his audience as the Good Shepherd. The audience had a little bit of problem in coming in and being able to put all of this together. And he was going to come in and provide them information with his way he lived his life there as far as to why he was indeed the Good Shepherd and why he made this statement. I want to start out this morning by talking about a few characteristics of a good shepherd, a successful shepherd, and why Christ was uniquely qualified and capable. A good shepherd must be confident, actually supremely confident. He must project confidence to the entire flock, reflect bravery and decisiveness. A good shepherd cannot be timid, and Christ earned the right to be the leader, the good shepherd. See, sheep sense indecision. If you look in Matthew, the 8th chapter by itself, you find 3 accounts of the healing of the leper, the centurion's son, and Peter's mother-in-law. There's no indecision. There's only compassion and action. And what about in Matthew, the 21st chapter, where he cleansed the temple? Definitely no indecision. He projected confidence. Think about Christ there in the last couple of days of his life when he endured the arrest, interrogation, torture, and crucifixion, as we read in Matthew 26 and 27. He was definitely reflecting a confidence there in his activities. And the Jews, in John the 7th chapter, when they sent the soldiers out to be able to come in and arrest Christ, they came back making the statement, when they came back without Christ, never has a man spoken the way this man speaks. A good shepherd must also be able to plan ahead. His actions must be intentional and must generate confidence. To be a successful shepherd, one must plan every step of the day's activity. Route of travel, grazing opportunities, water resources, bedding location, protection from the wind. See, sheep are by nature followers. Look at what we've already done today in David leading us in the Lord's Supper. Christ instituted this 2,000 years ago, and we still follow this practice. He was planning ahead to remind us every first day of the week. And what about his prediction of the institution of the church as he was relating to Peter and the disciples in Matthew 16? And Lazarus in the John the 11th chapter, Christ intentionally by design, waited 2 days later to arrive 4 days after Lazarus had died to be able to drive home the point that he could perform a certain miracle. And what about Christ when his brothers were tempting him to go up from Galilee to Jerusalem there to attend the feast? Christ said, no, I'll wait, and he went on his own terms. He was definitely planning ahead. See, Christ's entire ministry, every element, was planned in detail. A good shepherd must also lead from the front. I'm reminded of a story that took place in World War II. You know, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, remember, it serves me correct. And the Allies, we weren't prepared for being able to go into war. But in a few months' time, we had regrouped. Admiral Gormley had been placed in charge of all of the forces in the South Pacific. And they came in and decided when they would come in and try to recover some of the ground, and they decided they'd have their first attack on the Solomon Islands at a place called Guadalcanal. So Gormley sent in Major General Vandergrift and the 1st Marine Division to come in and start taking Guadalcanal. At first they made progress. They went into and captured the Henderson Field. They're also able to make some progress against the Japanese, but then everything bogged down. And the leadership back in Pearl Harbor in D.C. started to wonder, what is the problem? Why aren't we making any more progress? Well, the problem actually was with Admiral Gormley himself. See, Admiral Gormley never got any closer to Guadalcanal than 900 miles. Not a way to be able to lead him from the front. And immediately when he was replaced by Admiral Bull Halsey, who came in and made frequent visits to Guadalcanal, they got the resources they needed and were able to make the progress they needed and capture Guadalcanal. Think of Christ. He led from the front with his baptism, with his ministry in Galilee, as we read in Matthew 4, where he visited town by town, teaching wherever he went. And what about the Sermon on the Mount? Definitely leading from the front. And feeding the 5,000, he was leading from the front. Think of his triumphal entry to Jerusalem in Matthew the 21st chapter. And then in John the 13th chapter, when he came in and he washed the disciples' feet. Definitely leading from the front. And who can forget Gethsemane? When so many things had to be in Christ's mind, but yet he was thinking about his disciples. When in John 18 we read, he said, let these go their way. See, he was going to protect his disciples. Of those you have given me, I lost not one. A good shepherd can't be anxious. You know, there's a shepherd axiom that simply says, an anxious herder makes a lean flock. Christ didn't display anxiety. In Philippians 4:6, Paul is writing and he makes a simple statement, be anxious for nothing, which takes as its proof text that passage in Matthew the 26th chapter, Sermon on the Mount, where Christ said, do not be worried about your life, and who you, by being worried, can add a single hour to his life. A good shepherd must also be able to deal with difficult sheep. You remember I was telling you the story about the flock of sheep I saw in Utah back in 94? I can remember my granddaddy Jones. He always trained and kept on the farm there with him an Australian shepherd dog. He trained him from a puppy. And I can remember riding behind Granddaddy and we'd go out looking at the livestock there. And this dog had the ability to be able to come in and deal with the livestock so he could do the inspection. See, but Christ didn't need any assistance like that. But I learned that sometimes a little canine accountability can go a long way. Let's say Christ didn't need such an assistance as that. Think in Matthew the 12th chapter when he rebuked the Pharisees, and again in the 23rd chapter when he rebuked them again. And he denounced Chorazin and Bethsaida for not repenting in Matthew the 11th chapter. And who can forget the woman at Jacob's well we read in John the 4th chapter. Good shepherd must also be able to recharge, periodically recharge. Have private time, remain relevant. In Christ found time, he made time. Luke 5:16. But Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. In Matthew 14:23, he went up on the mountain to himself and prayed. See, Christ knew the importance of regenerating the spirit. He talked with God frequently. Good shepherd must also create the desire for others to follow him. You might say he has charisma. And the disciples certainly followed Christ. Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the forces in Europe in World War II, once made the statement, leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. Matthew 4:18, talking about Peter and Andrew. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And in Matthew 9:9, Matthew talking about himself, and he said to him, "Follow me," and he got up and followed him. Good shepherd must also set the standard. Remember the 40 days and 40 nights where Christ was in the wilderness facing temptation? He didn't succumb to temptation. He set the standard there. And what about on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 and 7, where Christ came in and presented the basic tenets of faith and character? Christ, the Good Shepherd, set the standard. He remained constant. I don't know about you, but I guess as I get older, I get more forgetful. But thank goodness for Apple. Apple has come in and provided us technology that can help us to take care of our forgetfulness. They provide us with tablets and smartphones and smartwatches to remind us when we need to do something. Recently, Pam gave me a smartwatch for Christmas. I was delighted to get such a gift, but I'll confess I had to have Pam help me come in and program it. No shame in that. I mean, she programs most of the things that I use. But anyway, first morning I was out walking, and I felt my arm vibrate when I was about 5 minutes into the walk, and I looked down and it says, "You're exercising, aren't you?" Well, I hadn't gone so far as to understand that I was exercising. Yet, went a while longer and came in and vibrated again. I looked down and it says, "You've reached your goal." Well, I hadn't reached my goal. I was only halfway through my walk. But I came in and looked down. It told me the length of my stride, latitude and longitude of exactly where I was, how many steps I had taken, my blood oxygen content, my blood pressure, countless other pieces of information that I really didn't need on my walk. That was my time. I got home and first thing I did was figured out how I could come in and turn off all the notifications on my smartphone. 2 points that I'd like to leave with you this morning. Now bear with me, they're going to sound sort of simplistic, but there's a reason for this. The first point is Christ is the Good Shepherd. He is our Good Shepherd. Your Good Shepherd, my Good Shepherd. He remains our Good Shepherd. He was given the job by God. He earned the right by His actions on earth, and He died for us. See, Christ has certainly done His part by living and dying and setting the example. He's a perfect leader. He remains our leader. He remains our advocate. Christ is constant and consistent. The Good Shepherd said in Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The Good Shepherd also established a church, a kingdom that will last forever, as He was talking to Peter and the other disciples in Matthew 16. The Good Shepherd, Christ, is the head of the church, and God is the head of Christ, as we read in Ephesians 5:23. And God and Christ know what we need. We read in Matthew 6:8, and He knows what you need. See, sheep are also valuable to Christ. Remember the parable of the lost sheep? We read in Matthew 18 and Luke 15. See, Christ values you. He left the entire flock to go out for the one sheep. And Christ commanded His sheep to follow Him. You know, if you look in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you're going to find 18 different references where Christ made the simple command, "Follow me." And as David has already led us in our discussion on the Lord's Supper this morning, Christ expects us to remember Him. Luke, the 22nd chapter, and also relates in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 24 and 25. He says, "Do this in remembrance of me." Christ wanted us to remember Him. Point number two, and lest we come in and miss the point. Ba. We are sheep, all right? Sheep tend to have a distinct odor. But see, sheep are valuable to Christ. We talked about Christ saw the merit, the value of individuals. Never forget, you are valuable in God's sight. You and I are important members of the flock. Sheep are to follow. Why don't we follow? 2 Corinthians 5:7 says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight," in John 10:4. "And the sheep follow him because they know his voice." Sheep get lost. They go astray. They need a shepherd. Without a shepherd, they're going to be lost. I remember it was one night I was down in the state of Veracruz in Mexico. It was getting toward dusk. I was near a little village called Parate on a project. And I heard a sound. And the sound became a little bit more distinct as time went on. The sun was setting, and it was the sound of a bell. I couldn't exactly figure out where it was coming from, but then I looked over to the horizon and I saw it. There was a shepherd. And beside the shepherd, there was the bellwether. We use this term bellwether. That's simply a special sheep that's got a bell strapped around its neck. And with the shepherd and the bell, they were able to follow their way into their enclosure for the evening. Matthew, the 10th chapter, verse 16, reminds us, as sheep in the midst of wolves. You know when he made that statement? He made that statement there when he was sending out the 12 to go in and do their discipleship. Matthew 9:36, like sheep without a shepherd. He made this statement when he was coming in and visiting the communities in and around Galilee, and he felt compassion for the people. And Mark 14:27, and the sheep shall be scattered. And think of Paul on his last missionary journey, his third missionary journey. He was in Miletus on his way back to Jerusalem when he was meeting with the Ephesian elders. He reminded them that you're going to be challenged by savage wolves. Paul also reminded Timothy in 2 Timothy 4:3 and 4 there that Christians can be misled because they would have their ears tickled. We as sheep don't do what we want. And we might as well just admit it. Paul admitted it, Romans 7:15. For what I am doing I do not understand, for I am not practicing what I would like to do, but I am doing the very thing that I hate. And in Galatians 5:17, for the flesh sets its desire against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. And Peter reminded us also, 1 Peter 2:25, for you are continually straying like sheep. See, we need to follow the Good Shepherd. We're dependent on Christ. I don't know if your family is like ours, but we tend to gravitate to merchants that come in and provide some reward or incentive, looking, I guess, for loyalty there. But I'll challenge you to find a reward, a loyalty plan, any better than what Christ the Shepherd offers us. If you look in Matthew, the 25th chapter, verses 20 through 23, we hear the parable of the talents. We find a similar parable in Luke, the 19th chapter. Significant point to me, everyone that remained faithful, that had received a resource, that had come in and managed that well, was rewarded. We have the certainty of a reward. Remember when Paul was coming in and trying to teach Timothy in Timothy, the first chapter, you fight the good fight, keeping the faith. And a man on his own word there, in 2 Timothy 4:7 and 8, he was able to make the statement to Timothy, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I've kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness. In Revelations 2:10, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. In Luke, the 15th chapter, we find three parables. I will refer briefly to two of these. The first is found in the first part of this chapter, verses 4 through 7 there. It was the parable of the lost sheep. So many lessons to be learned from this one particular parable. The point that struck me pertinent to our lesson this morning, this is an example of someone reaching out to a lost person. Christ looked out for the one sheep. That was important to him. And then Luke, the 15th chapter, the end of the chapter, where we talk about the prodigal son, where he was so much rejoicing in the home of the father and his servants there, an example of a person realizing the state of his own salvation. When you know there's the potential for reward, in Christ's own words, there's a problem for those that don't heed His admonition. We'll conclude with this. Mark 16:16, he who has believed and has been baptized shall be saved, but he who has disbelieved shall be condemned. In John 3:18, he who believes in Him is not judged. He who does not believe has been judged already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. In John 3:26, he who believes in the Son has eternal life, but he who does not obey the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God abides in him. See, each person must make the choice of whether or not she will follow the Christ, the good Lord, and the good Shepherd. This morning, if you've strayed from the flock, or if you've never honored Christ as the good Shepherd, we invite you to take action so that you can become once again an important member of the flock as we stand and sing.